When you let go of what you think you control, life begins to fall into place on its own. Autumn had begun to paint the forest leaves in shades of gold and crimson. At the top of a quiet hill stood an old wooden monastery, weathered but unwavering against the winds of time. There lived a young disciple named Aiko, whose thoughts were like the wind, never still. Aiko had come to the temple with a heavy heart, heavy with memories, expectations, and old wounds she clung to as if they were treasures. Though her master, the elder monk Jinin, guided her in meditation, contemplation, and quiet breathing, something within her refused to let go. One afternoon, as she swept fallen leaves from the garden path, she paused before the old persimmon tree. From the temple threshold, Master Jinin watched her in silence. "Aiko," he said gently, "why not let the wind carry those leaves away?" She answered without lifting her gaze, "If I don't gather them, the garden will look like a mess." Jinin smiled softly, as if his eyes could see beyond the surface. "Sometimes the chaos you fear is simply the order you don't yet understand." Aiko frowned, confused, but those words, like seeds, quietly took root within her. That night, the sound of the wind rattling the branches kept Aiko from sleeping. She sat up on her futon, watching the shadows dance across the wall. Her mind drifted back to her old home, to her sick mother, to the promise she couldn't keep. She carried all of it inside her, like a bowl filled to the brim, afraid that even a single drop might spill. At dawn, she found Master Jinin preparing tea. "Master," she said in a quiet, strained voice, "how do you let go of something when you don't even know how to begin?" Jinin poured hot water over the dried leaves and handed her a cup. "Look at this bowl," he said. "If you hold it tightly for hours, what happens?" "Your arm gets tired," Aiko replied. "And if you let it go, the bowl falls and breaks." Jinin nodded, then added softly, "Sometimes what falls doesn't break. Sometimes it finally finds where it belongs." Aiko drank in silence, confused, yet with a strange feeling inside her, as if something deep within had started to crack open, not to break, but to begin unfolding. In the days that followed, Aiko continued with her daily tasks, but something within her had shifted. She no longer tried to make everything perfect. If the leaves fell again after she swept them, she let them be for a while. If her tea didn't come out just right, she didn't start over. One afternoon, as she carried a basket full of stones to help reinforce the temple path, one slipped from her grip. She watched it tumble down the hill until it came to rest, perfectly nestled between two rocks, as if it had always belonged there. Jinin, who had been watching from a distance, slowly walked over. "Did you see it?" he asked, his voice as light as the breeze. Aiko nodded. "I didn't place it there. I didn't choose its spot. And yet, it found where it fits." Jinin narrowed his eyes with a quiet sense of peace. "The heart is the same," he said. "The more you hold it tight, the more it tires. The more you force it, the more it gets lost. But when you let it fall, when you stop gripping it, it finds its true place." Aiko sat down on the ground, the basket beside her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt no urge to do anything at all. She simply breathed. That afternoon, Master Jinin led Aiko to a quiet corner of the forest, where a small pond lay hidden among the bamboo. The water was so clear, you could see the bottom, scattered with smooth stones and leaves gently floating without resistance. "Look at the water," Jinin said, settling onto a nearby rock. "It doesn't hold on. It doesn't push. It doesn't cling. It simply flows." Aiko watched as a leaf drifted down from above, spinning slowly through the air before landing on the surface of the pond. Instead of sinking or getting stuck, It was carried gently by the current until it disappeared around a bend in the landscape. What would happen if that leaf resisted the flow? Jinan asked. It would sink, Aiko replied. And if the water tried to hold it in place? It would lose its clarity, she whispered, beginning to understand. The master looked at her with kind eyes. Letting go isn't giving up, Aiko. It's trust. It's allowing life to do its part. She closed her eyes, and for the first time she didn't try to control the thought that came. She let it pass like the leaf on the water, and in doing so, something inside her became light. That night, Aiko returned to the temple in silence. She sat before the altar, where a small oil lamp flickered gently. There, she reflected on all the things she had tried to control, the fate of her family, past decisions, even her own emotions. She had held it all so tightly, with a force she now realized had never been necessary. She picked up her journal, the one where she wrote her thoughts and prayers, and opened to a blank page. She didn't write anything. She simply looked at it, as if facing a space that, for once, demanded nothing from her. I don't need to fill it, she whispered to herself. Maybe it just needs to be. Master Jinan appeared behind her silently, as he often did. He placed a small stone beside her and said, "This stone isn't here to complete anything. It's here to remind you that even the simplest things have a place, when you stop trying to define them." Aiko took the stone and held it for a moment. Then, without thinking too much, she let it fall. Not carelessly, but gently. It landed on the tatami mat and rolled to a stop beside the lamp, as if it had always belonged there. A faint smile formed on her face. Maybe, she thought, peace doesn't come from holding on. Maybe peace arrives when you allow everything to fall into place. The next day, Jinan asked Aiko to join him at the old wooden bridge, the one the monks used to cross into the forest to gather firewood. The river below was swollen from recent rains, its current rushing fast, carrying along branches, leaves, and foam. "Watch the river," the master said. "Do you see how it holds on to nothing?" Aiko nodded, and Jinan continued. "The river doesn't ask why a branch fell. It doesn't try to catch it or stop it from leaving. It simply lets it go." She looked at the water, and without forcing it, memories began to rise. She saw her childhood, the joyful days with her mother, the quiet afternoons of illness, the promise she hadn't been able to keep. But this time, instead of clinging to the images, she let them float by like leaves on the current. She didn't resist. "I've held on to all of this because I was afraid of losing it," she whispered. "But by holding on, I only lost myself." Jinan looked at her with that stillness that always seemed to know more than words ever could. Nothing is truly lost when it's released with love. What is real doesn't break when it falls. It settles deeper, into where it truly belongs. Aiko closed her eyes. She breathed, and without speaking, she let the wind open her hands. She realized she didn't need to hold on to anything in order to be herself. For the first time, she did nothing. And in that not doing, everything fell into place. Days later, while walking alone through the forest, Aiko paused in front of an old tree, bent gently by the years. Its twisted branches seemed to reach toward the earth, and yet, they held a nest in perfect balance. Even what looks bent, she thought, can hold life without forcing it. She sat down at the base of the tree, letting the dappled sunlight filter through the leaves and brush against her face. What she felt wasn't the kind of stillness you chase by running from noise, but the kind that arrives when there's no longer any need to run. She no longer thought about fixing her story, or making it fit. She understood now. Trying to control life was like squeezing water in your hands. The harder you press, the more it slips away. What's meant to stay she whispered. Stays. Just then, a leaf drifted gently from the tree and landed on her shoulder. It wasn't a sign. It wasn't a symbol. It was simply a leaf falling into its place. And that was enough. Aiko smiled for no reason at all. Or perhaps for one very simple reason. At last, she had let go. The seasons passed, and Aiko became a quiet, steady presence in the temple. She was no longer the young woman trying to understand everything, nor the one struggling to hold every piece of her story together. She had become like the wind through the trees, sometimes whispering, sometimes still, but always moving forward. One day, while teaching the new disciples how to sweep the garden, one of them asked, "But what if the leaves fall again?" Aiko looked at him with warmth and replied, "Let them fall. Maybe the garden doesn't need to be clean, just lived." In the afternoons, she still sat beneath the old persimmon tree. No books, no journal, no need for answers. She simply sat. Sometimes memories came, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she laughed. But she no longer tried to hold anything in place. She had come to understand. It wasn't about controlling the shape of life, but trusting that when you stop holding on out of fear, life finds its own harmony, like stones rolling into their place, like leaves falling without getting lost, like souls that finally let go and rest. And so, in her quiet, everyday silence, Aiko, too, found where she belonged. No effort, no struggle, just being.